You're listening to The Voluntary Life, where you can hear ideas for finding freedom in an unfree world. Visit thevoluntarylife.com to connect with the show and hear all past episodes. Here's your host, Jake.
Hi, it's Jake here. Welcome to The Voluntary Life. I'm very pleased to have two special guests on this episode, and today I'm going to talk to them about some topics which are really of great interest to me and things that I've touched on a lot on The Voluntary Life. Financial independence, minimalism, and permanent travel. They are Jeremy and Winnie from the blog Go Curry Cracker. Hi, Jeremy and Winnie.
Hey, Jake.
Hello, Jake.
Hi. Thank you so much for coming on to talk today. I'm really pleased to meet you because I've enjoyed following your travels on your blog. I think we nearly were in Puerto Escondido at the same time, but I found out about you just after I left.
Yeah, the timing always seems to work out that way. Like we've met so many, virtually a bunch of other bloggers and travelers, and we always seem to miss each other by just days.
Yeah. Well, I'm really enjoying your blog. And for people who don't yet know about Go Curry Cracker, could you just sort of explain what's the idea behind your blog and what's your background?
Sure. So Go Curry Cracker is it's kind of a two-faceted blog. Part of it is just, we are traveling around the world. We don't really have an itinerary. We don't really have a next place we're going. We just go somewhere, explore, and move on from there. When we share, aspects of our daily life, where we are, interesting things that we find in each location, and as well as all of the detailed expenses. Like every dollar we spend, we share in full detail, so people can say, oh, I'm interested in going to this place, and oh, the Go Curry Cracker guys were there. Let's see how much they spent and what their cost of living was there. And then the other portion of the blog is just a little bit about the journey building up to the point where we could quit our jobs and start traveling the world. So it's about our journey to financial independence and some of the philosophy of how to save a high percentage of income and how to invest it.
Right, yeah, and I'm really interested to ask you about that because my route to financial independence was more through entrepreneurship and through selling a business. But I'm very interested to find out, how did you guys originally get into the idea of financial independence? How did you sort of learn about it or think about it and start your journey?
I guess because we are both lazy, we don't want to work. So we started to look for some way to quit job and travel full time. Yeah,
there was a point somewhere 10 plus years ago where I had been doing the incredibly long hours and maybe other people viewed me as a workaholic, and I took the first vacation of my adult life.
Right.
And the first week, it was really hard to get away from, checking email and what's going on in the office and thinking about problems that you'd left unsolved before you left. And, by week 2, I started to kind of think, hey, this place is pretty nice. And by week 3, it was more of the question of how can I do this every day for the rest of my life? And from there, it was a big, uphill sort of learning curve of just, all these questions. So what about health insurance? What about taxes? How much money do I need? How much does it cost to travel? And it just took time and effort to learn about that. And it kind of coincided with the time we had sort of figured out, hey, we can do this, and the time that we had the money were right around the same period.
That's awesome. And I think it's also really cool that you both sort of had that purpose and both kind of were really into that, because I know that it is a very distinctive lifestyle choice to go for sort of extreme saving and to really push for financial independence. And just reading, people online who write about it, sometimes, one partner may be into that and the other partner not. And I think that can be difficult. So it's really cool. It sounds like you both were pretty much into the same goal from the beginning. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. No, it's just because I'm obedient Asian wife. I do whatever my husband told me to
do. Yeah, that's one of those statements that you know by stating it out loud that it's not true.
But I'm curious to ask about how you kind of the practicality of it, because this is a very different lifestyle choice to the kind of norm. And you write about this a bit on the blog. So did you two find, what was the sort of responses that you got from friends and family and work colleagues about, going for financial independence or going through sort of, intensive saving?
I think when people come to our apartment, they look kind of surprised, like, it's an interesting choice.
The apartment in Seattle.
Yeah, in Seattle. It's small and we don't have much stuff. So, yeah.
But I think, part of the reason we started sharing expenses on the blog was because of the questions from kind of former coworkers of, like, you can really do that? It was sort of disbelief. But I think even today, after 2 years of sharing, people's opinions hasn't really changed very much.
They just kind of think we want to go back to work.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when we are doing it, like saving a lot, we don't feel we are suffering. We just kind of get used to it. Yeah.
Yeah, there was never really a sense of sacrifice or like we were shouldering a large burden or suffering. It was just we lived a really enjoyable life, and we even ended up. I worked a few years longer than we thought was necessary, just because we were happy doing what we were doing.
Right. Mm-hmm. Cool. Well, I'm really interested to hear about the sort of kind of the logistics of it, I suppose, because I've read about people who've pursued financial independence through intensive saving. A lot of people talk about really going for saving more than 50% of your income, trying to save up to 75% of your income, and so was that your approach, and what percentage were you trying to save, and how long did it take you?
So we have a blog post called 10 Years in a Day.
Right.
And that is basically the time period from when we really sort of said, hey, like let's make this a goal, to the day that I quit my job. And during that time period, we were saving upwards of, at the beginning it was a little less, but say 70% or so. And then the last couple of years, if you think of it, like, our portfolio was basically supporting our lifestyle. And so 100% of our after-tax income was going into savings. But, just the straight up math of it kind of works out. If you're doing a typical sort of 10% savings rate, you need to work 10 years, really 9 years, before you have enough put away to fund 1 year of your current lifestyle. Where if you're saving 90%, after 1 year of work, you've saved 9 years of living expenses. And so something pretty magical starts to happen in the compounding when you get above sort of the 50-60% savings rate.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess a part of that is the frugality aspect of keeping your expenses as low as you can, because the lower they are, then the more those savings, the more time those savings are gonna support. And is that something that was that a real significant lifestyle change for you, or were you always pretty frugal? What was that? Did you have to do a lot of changes to your life to make that happen?
Well, you're exactly right. It's kind of a two-pronged approach, right? Like, the less that you need to spend, the higher percentage you can save, and so on. And so by being frugal, you get a double benefit. But
I remember one time Jeremy showed me an article about people who bought bulk beans and rice And I'm like, is that what you're gonna do the next day? I don't want to turn into a horse.
Yeah, why are you showing me this article?
You have to gauge the reaction, you know.
I'll just leave this here on the table and see what the response is.
But we did try to make a lot of bean soup. Yeah,
we explored.
Yeah, the way to save,
because you don't know what works for you until you try it. Some things that sound crazy, once you try them, actually are enjoyable, and vice versa. So, but our main our main three savings approaches are kind of what give people 80% of the benefit. You know, it's where most of the money goes. It's between housing, transportation, and food. And we while many of my coworkers were living in 3,000 square foot homes that were being paid for with a large mortgage from dual income families, and we were living in a 900 square foot apartment in like a 1930s era building, and I don't feel like we lacked anything because we weren't in the 3,000 square foot house. If anything, we didn't have to paint, we didn't have to mow the lawn, we didn't have to, clean all this space that we weren't using.
And I kind of feel like I'm doing something good for the environment.
Yeah, you're not wasting the resource on.
I don't like waste things.
So you're not heating. If we spend 90% of our time in, that several hundred square feet, why heat and cool and maintain the other several thousand that some Americans live in? So, that was one piece of it. And so our costs, of course, were substantially less than our peers. And then transportation-wise, we, very actively found where we lived. We were a block from a grocery store, like 5 blocks from another, 7 blocks from another. We were across the street from the weekly farmers market. We were like 5 blocks from the public library. We were on a main kind of thoroughfare for public transit, so I could literally walk downstairs and get on a bus that would take me to the office. And so we didn't have a car, and I most days actually commuted to work by bicycle. Somebody asked me, "Is there anything you miss about the time you were working?" And the only thing I can think of is that I don't get to ride my bike as much.
Right.
And the third piece of our kind of expense reduction was primarily around food, and we did look at what is the cost of a meal, of an average meal. What are there ways that we could compensate for expensive meals by having a low cost one? So we experimented with some bean soups and quickly got rid of those. But largely it was there was a period where I would come home from work and find that Winnie had prepared like a 6-course dinner from. She was working through a French and an Italian cookbook, and we just got to the point where it's like, why go out to eat when we're having these amazing meals at home for a fraction of the price?
Right.
And like Winnie's cooking skills, I think rival many Michelin star chefs.
Yeah.
Is
this a way to keep you working?
I'm buttered up with her. Yeah. And most of that happened over the course of like a few years of she invested and kind of focused on, I'm going to make great food at home for reasonable price.
Right. Wow, there's so much there that you've talked about that I think is really interesting in terms of the housing, the transport, and the food. And I saw on your blog as well, and you just mentioned that you didn't own a car, and you've got some links on your blog about car-free living. I think that's awesome. I also have never owned a car, and I think in Europe that's a lot more common than in the States. probably because some American cities are just so low density that it's the kind of car use is kind of built in. So I'm guessing it's harder for some people in some circumstances where there just aren't really walkable neighborhoods. But it sounds like you chose where to live, with thinking about not owning a car in mind.
Yeah, exactly. Like I wrote a blog post that went through the whole process we went through in finding our the last apartment we had, and it was literally pull up a map. Look at all of the bus routes that were on a path to work, no transfers, no hassles. And then based off of that bus route, look at kind of dense population areas with mixed use of, where is there a library, a grocery store, a park? And then from there, finding apartments or homes for rent in that area. Yeah, so it was very conscious around we don't want to have a car.
Right.
And you're right. I think most American cities are. It's kind of the de facto assumption that you will have a car, if not two or three, in one household, and so everything does kind of happen to be spread apart. But there are some really great locations in nearly every city where you can, if your goal is to be car free, you can make it work and enjoy it.
Absolutely. One of the things that strikes me about what you're saying in terms of being car free, and also, Winnie, what you were saying about the apartment that you guys lived in and stuff, is that a lot of the sort of difficulties that people have with adopting this kind of lifestyle is that in our culture, status is kind of displayed through these things, right? I mean, people, you have to kind of go off the mainstream and do something and be willing to live differently in order to not, get sort of caught up in that consumption lifestyle, because that is how a lot of unspoken sort of social cues come about where you are in life and what your status is. And I'm wondering, is that something that you guys found challenging, or is it something that you noticed as you were adopting this lifestyle?
What do you think? I mean, so in general, like I
think you don't care what people think.
Yeah, that's. I'll try to think of a polite way to say it.
Well, I think that's awesome. I really admire that. But have you noticed that other people, a lot of people do, right? Because I think this is one reason why there aren't more people trying to do this.
And lots of people we kind of choose to hang out with, that we, even though they cannot agree like completely about what our idea, but they kind of respect our life choice. They even like surprised that we can do it.
I think there are a couple different because people have multiple sort of social circles. And most of my work colleagues, they would I would show up on my bicycle, right? And I walk into work with my street bike over my shoulder and climb upstairs in my biking shoes and whatever, and plop my bicycle down in my office, and I'd get the sideways looks and whatever. And people would be curious and ask questions about it, and those were interested, I would share. But for the most part, 90% of what happened at work was just, what's your job performance? Are you good at what you do? And you kind of developed mutual respect from that. Then outside of that, I had friends that I biked with, right? And they didn't necessarily know a lot about work, but they knew if I could hold my place in a pace line very well, and then so you kind of had the hobby friends. And then I had friends with just similar values that have held up over the years. And so, I think in all three of those cases, we found something in common with people. And And so the differences weren't really what mattered.
And slowly they start to get curious, like how we do it, how we did it. Like they want to learn from us.
Yeah.
Like, oh, can we do that too? How can we retire even like 10 years earlier?
Yeah. And the day I quit, interest peaked. Right.
Right.
I suddenly had this onslaught of invites for drinks and dinners. So.
Right. Oh, I think it's great. I think it's inspirational for people who are interested. And from what you're saying, I do think it's really important to have friends and people around you who do share your values, or if not share them, then as you were saying, when you just respect your values and kind of understand what you're doing, and don't find it sort of threatening. Because I think sometimes some people can find. I've noticed on some of the financial independence blogs, there are some sort of troll comments that come on, and
there are some angry comments like, "Oh, you guys are crazy."
Right, exactly. And I think some people find it threatening to see that, because what you're doing, the immediate question in anybody's mind is then, well, if they can do it, then why aren't I doing it? And
it's sad that you don't want that you reject a new idea just because you're afraid.
Because it's different.
It's new, yeah.
Yeah. I in general, I think if there's one way to look at maybe like a life philosophy, it's that there's no one right way to live. And so anybody who we meet, like everybody that you meet knows something that you don't, and has experiences that you don't. So there's always a way to learn from others. And I think some financial independence people, or I guess maybe some from every world perspective, some of them can be a little preachy and pushy, and it can turn people off, or they can be judgmental.
Right.
And I'd say we're the exact opposite of that, and it makes it a lot easier to relate to others, accept them as they are, and it also makes it easier to learn in both directions.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. So I wanted to ask you guys about traveling, because that's obviously been, from the way you described it, a key goal. And the interesting thing, though, is that some people also consider leaving a kind of high expense, high income country like the States or like Europe to be a way of saving as well, and going to live in cheaper places as a kind of geo arbitrage. And so I wanted to ask you, how did you get into the full-time travel? Is that just something that you really wanted to do because it's fun and fulfilling, or is it also a part of living more frugally?
Like I always have a dream that I want to travel around the world. I think lots of people, they all have this dream. So we just do it.
Awesome.
There are a couple of different parts of that question. So let me address the financial one first. There's a transition period that I think is fairly common for people who retire regardless of their age. It's that transition from I have a full-time job. There will be more money deposited in my checking account in the near future. Like that mentality of the working and paycheck cycle. And then transitioning from kind of net positive savings to living off the savings can be, well, it's a transition, right? Some people handle it well. Some people struggle through it. And we consciously chose
Central America,
lower cost of living countries as our starting point, just to make that transition easier financially and psychologically. And so that's why we started Mexico, Guatemala. It's definitely a lower cost of living than Seattle was.
The life there was awesome.
Yeah,
we love it.
I lived in Mexico for 6 months over the winter, and for a few months the year before as well. I love it too. It's just an awesome place.
Yeah. And people are fabulous in Mexico, and food is fabulous, weather is fabulous. So it's hard not to like it. the other side of it is just, there. I've traveled for as long as I can remember, both from the holiday and work, and like I lived abroad for a year and a half, and the you learn so much about yourself when you come into contact with other cultures, because there's a culture doesn't really recognize its own inconsistencies or kind of nuances until they're put in light of something different. And so you can't, I don't know, I think people naturally become more tolerant and open as they become exposed to other ways of living. And I've always enjoyed that and wanted to continue to do it. And so travel is partly just a way to see cool places, to see interesting architecture, to meet people, and to learn new ways of viewing the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. And I understand that phase that you're talking about in your response about moving to what people call moving into the drawdown phase on your investments, where you're just living from your investments, and it's a bit of an adjustment to work out like, whoa, is this going to work? And so I think it makes sense to go to a low cost place initially.
Yeah. In the first few months, like we check our portfolio every 10 minutes.
Right. Right. Well, I wanted to actually ask you about that because this is another side of the coin for financial independence, is the investing, and so just broadly, could you talk a little bit about what your approach to investment is, and how you've approached living from your investments?
Yeah, so as Winnie was kind enough to mention earlier on, I'm extremely lazy, and that kind of personality trait carries over to investing as well. So nearly all of our funds are in one index fund,
right?
And it was like we're more or less about 80% stock, 20% bonds, and as it makes sense, like as we do normal sort of balancing and reallocation transition, I'm moving that towards 100% stock. And we have several months worth of expenses in cash. Anytime there's a dividend or interest payment, it gets deposited directly into the cash account, and we just live off of that. Right. The last 2 years, that's covered 99% of our expenses, the income. So we haven't had to sell anything. If in the future, that happens to be the case that we need to top it off, then we would just sell some stock as part of our annual reallocation.
Right. And you're presumably, have you been working with the basic plan of not spending more than 4% in your going forward from your portfolio? Because it sounds like most of it is coming out of dividend anyway. But was that sort of what led you to decide? Okay, this is doable now, because that seems to be the general number that most people work with.
Yeah, the 4% rule is definitely a guide. I think some financial writers seem to think that it's overly conservative. Some think it's not conservative enough. I tend to agree with the overly conservative part. But if that's the case, then we are overly conservative. I mean, we're spending much less than 4% right now, and that's just part of our psychological transition, right? The lower cost of living countries at the beginning.
Yeah.
But we live quite luxuriously, I would say, even it's under 4%.
Yeah. Right. I can't think of anything that I would spend money on that I'm not already doing, or we are not already doing. But we're not lacking for anything, so it works.
That's awesome. I just wanted to ask you about the move fully into stocks. And I mean, this obviously could potentially be a big discussion, so we don't need to get into too much detail. But I'm curious about, because I'm also a passive investor, and I'm way too lazy to spend time trying to pick stocks or anything. So I really understand your use of index funds. But I just wonder, obviously, if you do go all into stocks, then you are going to have the volatility that goes with that. And is that just something that you've decided to accept, that, that so be it? There may be times when the market crashes and you'll just accept that? Or what are your views about the sort of downside of only being in one asset class?
Here's I've done a little bit of modeling on this. There's a sort of crowdsourced modeling tool called CFireSim. I'm just lacking for their website right now, but I think it's cfiresim.org. And it's one of these tools that kind of backtest the cfiresim.com. Anyways, it's one of these tools that you can enter, different kind of starting assumptions of portfolio value and asset allocation, and it does back testing of all the historical data for inflation and stock returns and dividends and interest rates and so on, and gives you a success rate. Right? Like, your portfolio would have survived 90% of whatever cases, right? And it does this very simple analysis of where the 4% rule originally comes from. You're going to withdraw the same amount every year, adjusted for inflation. Nothing's going to change, and then what happens, right? Do you run out of money or not? And if you look at sort of the 70-year horizon for things, sure, a stock bond mix portfolio will have generally less volatile returns. But many years from now, it can mean the difference between us having, say, 10 million and 100 million. Right? Because stocks will perform better in the long run, just because of the way the business cycle works. So, we'll die someday, and whether we have $1 or $1 billion, it doesn't really matter at that point to us. But it can mean the difference between maybe opening one charitable hospital or a nationwide series of hospitals. And so that's really what we're looking at, is what the fund value is when we leave it to the next generation.
Right. Well, that's really interesting. I follow an approach called the permanent portfolio. And I don't know if you've heard of that. It's
the Harry Brown approach.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And I've seen some back tests of that. But that's really interesting to hear your approach. And it sounds like, as you say, that your real concern is what you can do, what good you can do with your portfolio when you're no longer around to use it anymore.
Exactly. See, many times, so if our life expectancy is 70 years from now, or this additional 70 years, several times over that period, the stock market's going to drop, and it's going to drop substantially. But it won't change what we do on a daily basis in any way. So, since we know we can psychologically deal with that, then there's really no point in not going after the extra growth. Cool.
Well, I think it's great. I really admire your blog and what you're doing. And I wonder, for anyone who's inspired by your story, what kind of advice would you give them if they want to pursue a similar goal to you?
Find a frugal, obedient wife. Yeah, find a partner that shares similar value with you. That's important.
And during the savings phase, I'm going to go with learn to love your bicycle.
Right.
Abandon the car commute, and During the post phase, it's going to be stay away from resorts and sort of the export of the American travel resort model, and get as close to local people as possible, because it'll benefit both your wallet and your worldview.
I think that's great advice. I really agree with what both of you said, and I've also found, I think for any lifestyle choices like this, it's so important that you have the same goals as your partner. I think that's, as I say, reading other people's blogs and stuff, that's one of the things that sometimes people find very difficult. I'm also a minimalist, and my partner and I are both location independent and traveling. And if she didn't have the same goals, then that would be a whole different ballgame. So I think you're absolutely right. That it's got to be something that you can both agree on. And I'm totally with the idea of getting as close to real life and away from the resorts when you travel. I think that's great advice. So for anyone who's interested in finding out more about you, where can they find you?
So we are at gocurrycracker.com. We also have a Facebook page and a Twitter feed, and you can find all of that directly from the blog.
Awesome. Well, Jeremy and Winnie, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jake. Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to The Voluntary Life. If you have feedback about the show, please email jake@thevoluntarylife.com. If you enjoyed this program, please share the podcast with your friends or click the donate button on thevoluntarylife.com.